Alara Voss had not planned to be awake at 3 in the morning. She had not planned a lot of things that had brought her to this mountain. She had not planned to fall in love with someone who treated her kindness like a burden, or to spend 6 months recovering from it alone, in a cabin so far from the nearest town that the only news she received was the weather. She had not planned any of it. But she was here now, in wool socks and an oversized coat, holding a lantern in the freezing dark, following a sound that had no business being so close to her door. It was not a howl. She knew what howls sounded like. She had spent years studying wolves in the field, had recorded hundreds of hours of their voices, had learned to read the difference between a territorial call and a greeting and a warning. This was none of those things. This was something lower, something that pressed against the chest and stayed there. A sound that was almost human in its exhaustion. She found him at the edge of the tree line. He was enormous. Even lying on his side in the snow, she could see that he was larger than any wolf she had ever documented. His fur was pure white, the kind of white that seems to hold light rather than reflect it, and it was matted dark along his right side where the wound had opened. The gash was deep. She could see that from 3 steps away. She should have gone back inside. She knew that too. She was a scientist, not a fool, and a wounded predator was one of the most dangerous things a person could encounter alone in the wilderness. She knelt in the snow beside him anyway. His eyes opened. They were pale, almost silver, and they found her face with a focus that made her breath catch. There was something in that gaze that was not quite animal, not quite anything she had a word for, but it was not aggression. She held very still and let him look at her, and after a moment, the tension in his enormous body eased, just slightly, as though he had made a decision. She opened her field kit. She worked in silence, the way she always worked, with steady hands and quiet concentration. She cleaned the wound as carefully as she could in the cold, and she talked while she worked. Not commands, just words. She told him he was going to be all right. She told him she was not going to hurt him. She told him that she had done this before, that she had treated wolves in the field during her research, that her hands knew what they were doing even when the rest of her was terrified. She was not sure he understood any of it. She said it anyway. He did not move against her once. When she had done everything she could do outside, she made a decision that she knew was probably the strangest of her life. She coaxed him inside. It took time. She held the cabin door open and spoke to him, and waited, and eventually he rose on 3 legs and walked through the doorway with a dignity that seemed wrong for an injured animal, and right for something else she could not name. She spread blankets near the fireplace. She built the fire up high. She set water nearby, and then she sat across the room in her old reading chair and watched him settle onto the blankets, and she thought, I will call the wildlife station in the morning. She did not sleep. She was not sure he did either. They kept watch on each other across the warm, quiet room, and the fire burned down slowly, and outside the wind moved through the pines, and it was the strangest and most peaceful night she had spent in months. Around 5 in the morning, things began to change. She noticed it in the way he breathed. It became slower, more deliberate, like someone concentrating very hard on remaining still. Twice he raised his head and looked at her with that expression she could not place, the one that sat somewhere between pain and something that looked almost like apology. His body shivered occasionally, not from cold, she realized. The cabin was warm. The shivering was something else, something internal, something that seemed to be pressing against the edges of him, looking for a way out. She leaned forward in her chair. Hey, she said softly, I am right here. Whatever is happening, I am not going anywhere. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he lowered his head back onto the blankets, and she heard him exhale, long and slow, and the room was quiet again. She started talking. She did not plan to. She had spent months being very careful about what she said and to whom, had kept most of her feelings folded up tight where they could not embarrass her. But something about the dark and the fire and the way he listened made the words come loose. She told him about the man she had loved, about how she had given that relationship everything she had rearranged her career and her plans and her sense of herself around it, and how in the end, he had told her that she was too much, too intense, too focused on things that did not matter, like quiet mornings, and animals in the snow, and the way certain kinds of light made the world look like a painting. She had driven up the mountain 2 days after that conversation, and she had not spoken to anyone in 3 weeks. "I came up here to figure out who I am, without someone else defining it," she said quietly. "I think I am still figuring it out." The wolf's pale eyes were on her face the entire time she spoke. "You are a very good listener," she told him. "Better than most people I know." The sky outside the cabin window began to change color. The deep blue-black of the night lightened, very slowly, to something softer, gray. Then the first pale gold at the edge of the ridge. Ilara stood and moved to the fireplace to add more wood, her back to the room, and she heard the fire catch and begin to breathe again. And then she heard something else. It was a sound she had no reference for. Not loud, but enormous somehow. Like the air in the room being drawn inward all at once. Like pressure releasing. Like a door closing on one world and opening on another. It lasted only a few seconds. Then there was silence so complete she could hear her own heartbeat. She turned around. The wolf was gone. Kneeling on the blankets by her fireplace, in the exact space where the wolf had been, was a man. He was perhaps 29 or 30, broad-shouldered, dark-haired, and he wore nothing above the waist, which made immediately visible the bandaging along his right side. Her bandaging. The same placement. The same careful wrapping she had done in the snow at 3 in the morning. He was looking at the floor, his hands resting on his knees, and when he raised his head and looked at her, she saw them. His eyes were pale silver, the exact color the wolf's eyes had been. Ilara stood very still. She was a person who believed in evidence. She was a person who trusted what she could observe and measure and document. She looked at this man, this impossible man, with her thread stitching his wound closed, and she sorted through every rational explanation she had, and found none of them adequate. He said quietly, "You did not run." His voice was low and steady, not unkind. Ilara looked at him for another long moment. Then she said the only thing that was true. "You were bleeding." Something moved across his face. It was not quite a smile. It was softer than that, more surprised. "Yes," he said, "I was." His name was Calum Ashvale. He told her carefully, watching her face the whole time, looking for fear, or anger, or the impulse to reach for a phone. He told her what he was, what his people were. He told her that he had been traveling through the mountain range when hunters from a rival group had tracked and ambushed him, that he had taken the wound in the fight, that he had been cut off from his own territory and too badly hurt to shift back. He had moved toward the nearest light he could sense, her cabin. Ilara listened to all of it without interrupting. When he was finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she went to the kitchen and made coffee. She brought 2 cups back and set one in front of him and sat down across the small table with her own, and she said, "So you have been able to understand everything I said to you tonight?" "Yes," he said, "including the part about my relationship." A pause. "Yes." She looked at her coffee cup. "That is slightly mortifying." "It should not be," he said. "What you said was honest. Honest things are not mortifying. They are rare." She looked up at him. He was watching her the way the wolf had watched her, with that complete, unguarded attention, like she was the only thing in the room worth looking at. It was a strange and unfamiliar feeling, not uncomfortable, just new. They talked for a long time. The morning came in fully, gold and clean through the pine trees, and she learned that he was not just a member of his kind, but the leader of one of the oldest lines among them. She learned that he had held that position for years, and that it was a position that required him to be strong and decisive, and rarely, if ever, uncertain. She learned that he did not speak about himself easily, and that he was doing it now for a reason he had not yet stated. She asked him, eventually, what that reason was. He was quiet for a moment. He looked at his hands. "Among my people," he said slowly, "there is a bond. A recognition between 2 people that is not chosen. It cannot be forced or arranged or decided. It simply arrives." He paused. "The way you know a song you have not heard before. You know it is yours the moment it starts." Ilara said nothing. "I felt it," he said, "the moment you touched me. In the snow, when you were not afraid." He lifted his eyes to hers. "I want to be honest with you, because you were honest with me tonight. I do not want to create confusion or cause you fear. I am telling you because you deserve to know. What you are to me is not something I chose. But what I do about it, that is entirely my choice, and that choice will always be yours to accept or refuse. The cabin was very quiet. Ilara set her coffee down. She thought about what he had said, turned it over the way she turned over data in the field, looking at it from different sides. She thought about the night, the wolf in the snow, the hours of watching each other across a firelit room, the way he had listened to her when no one else had been listening. I am not anything like you, she said finally. I know, he said. That is not what matters. What does matter? He looked at her steadily. You knelt in the snow in the middle of the night for something that could have killed you. You stayed with it for hours. You gave it warmth and your voice and your honesty. He paused. I have held a great deal of power for a long time, and no one has ever given me anything without wanting something in return. He stopped. You did not know what I was. You did not know what I could give you. You helped me because something was hurting, and you could not walk past it. Ilara felt something in her chest shift. Not dramatically, not in the way that songs described, quietly, the way light changes in a room when a cloud moves. She reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. He looked down at her hand. He did not move. She felt the tension in him, the careful stillness of someone who was not accustomed to being touched gently. I am not saying yes to anything yet, she said. I am saying I hear you, and I am glad you are not bleeding to death in my snow anymore. The almost smile returned to his face, warmer this time. So am I, he said. Around midday, they appeared at the tree line. She saw them through the window first, a line of wolves in the shadows of the pines, watching the cabin with patient gold eyes. A dozen of them, maybe more. She understood, without being told, that they were his. He stood at the door, and she stood beside him. You should go, she said. They need you. Yes. He did not move immediately. He looked at her with that silver gaze, steady and serious. I will come back. I know, she said, and she did know. She was not sure how, but she did. He walked toward the trees. At the edge of the light, at the exact border between the open snowfield and the shadow of the forest, he stopped and turned. He looked at her for a long moment, the kind of look that says everything and needs no translation. Then he turned back toward the trees, and she watched the change happen, that impossible, astonishing thing, the air folding inward around him, and where the man had stood, the white wolf was there instead. He looked back at her one last time with those silver eyes. Then he was gone into the forest, and the other wolves followed, and the tree line was still and quiet and ordinary in the winter light. Ilara stood at the doorway for a while, feeling the cold on her face and the warmth of the cabin behind her. She thought about what the last few hours had been, about what it meant to kneel in the snow beside something suffering and stay, about the way certain moments rearranged everything without asking permission. She went inside. She did not call the wildlife station. She cleaned up the blankets by the fireplace and stood there for a moment, looking at the place where he had knelt in the early morning light. She put her hand on the floor where his hands had rested. The wood was still warm. She made herself a second cup of coffee, sat down at the kitchen table, and waited. She did not know exactly what was coming. She did not know what his world looked like or what a life touched by it would ask of her. She did not know the answers to any of the practical, reasonable questions her mind was already forming. But she had learned something about herself on this mountain, something she had come here to find. She was not someone who walked away from things that were wounded and real and worth protecting. She never had been. Whatever came through that forest next, she would meet it the same way she had met everything else. With steady hands and an open door.